She called me at 10:45 on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact time because I'd just finished a deposition and was walking back to my office, coffee in hand, thinking about lunch. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket, and Camille's name lit up the screen. I answered without a second thought, the way you answer your wife of 14 years when she calls in the middle of the day. You don't brace yourself. You don't prepare. You just answer. Whitfield. Her voice was different, clipped, flat, like she was reading from a document rather than talking to her husband. Hey, what's up? I just got out of... I need you to listen carefully and not interrupt me. I stopped walking. There's a tone that exists in a marriage, a register that sits below language itself. And when you hear it, your body knows before your brain does. My stomach dropped about 3 seconds before I understood why. My uncle passed away last night, she said. Gerald. He had no children, no wife, and apparently... And here she paused, the way people pause when they want the next words to land with maximum force. He left everything to me. The estate, the property, the accounts, all of it. The attorney called this morning. We're talking about somewhere between $6 and $8 million, Whitfield. I didn't say anything. I was doing the math the way you do when information arrives faster than your mind can process it. Gerald Fowler. Camille's mother's older brother. Retired oil consultant from Midland, Texas. I'd met him exactly 4 times in 14 years of marriage. A quiet man. Reserved. The kind of uncle who sent checks for birthdays and never showed up in person. Camille, I said carefully. I don't know what to say. That's incredible. Are you okay? Were you close to... I need you to come home and pack your things. And there it was. The thing her voice had been building toward the whole time. The sentence she'd called to deliver. I'm sorry, I said, because I genuinely wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. You heard me. I want you out by the end of the week. The divorce papers are already being drawn up. I spoke to my attorney this morning, right after I spoke to Gerald's estate lawyer. I've been thinking about this for a long time, Whitfield. This just makes it easier. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in the hallway of the Collins, Merritt, and Hale law offices in downtown Columbus, Ohio, holding a cup of coffee that was getting cold, staring at my phone like it might ring again and correct itself. Like this was some kind of miscommunication that would resolve itself if I waited long enough. It didn't ring. My name is Whitfield Mercer. I'm 43 years old, and I'm a senior litigation partner at the firm I just mentioned. Which I mention only because it matters later, in ways that Camille apparently hadn't considered when she made that phone call. I grew up in Zanesville, Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your father's handshake and your grandfather's name. I put myself through law school at Ohio State on a combination of scholarships, loans, and weekend shifts at a warehouse in Grove City. I passed the bar on my first attempt. I made partner at 38. I am not a man who makes careless decisions, and I am not a man who folds under pressure. Those 2 facts are going to become very important in a moment. But first, if this story is finding you at the beginning of something hard, if you're in the middle of a situation where someone's trying to use money or power to push you out of your own life, stay with me, because what happened next is the part nobody saw coming, especially not Camille. Before you hear the rest of this, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment below. I want to hear from you. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about holding your ground when someone tries to buy you out of your own dignity, share this video with them. Now let's get back to that phone call. I've been married to Camille Fowler Mercer for 14 years. We met at a fundraising dinner in Columbus. She was event coordinator for a nonprofit that worked with foster kids, and I was there on behalf of the firm. She wore a green dress and laughed at something a colleague said, and that laugh was the beginning of my undoing. We dated for 2 years. I asked her father for permission the old-fashioned way, standing in his living room in Gahanna, Ohio, sweating through a good shirt. The early years were good, better than good. We bought a house in Bexley, a white colonial on Drexel Avenue with a yard that needed more attention than either of us had time to give it. Camille worked in nonprofit development, eventually moving into hospital administration at Ohio Health. She was good at her job, driven, the kind of woman who made things happen through force of personality and meticulous preparation. I admired that about her. I still do, in a complicated way, that I don't fully understand yet. We never had children, which wasn't entirely by choice. There were 3 years in the middle of our marriage where the conversation about kids dominated everything. The appointments, the procedures, the hope, and the loss and the grief that doesn't have a clean name. 3 rounds of IVF, 2 miscarriages, the particular silence of a house where a nursery never got painted. We came out of that period differently shaped than we went in. I know that now. I think I knew it then too, but I chose to believe we were still the same 2 people, just weathered. I told myself the distance was something we'd work back from. I told myself that grief does this, creates space between people who love each other, and that the space would close when we were both ready. I'm not sure it ever closed. I think I just stopped measuring it. In the years that followed, we found our equilibrium, but it was a different kind than what we'd started with. More functional, more scheduled. We had routines that worked, friendships we maintained separately, vacations that looked good in photographs. From the outside, I imagine we looked like a solid couple in middle age, a lawyer and a hospital administrator, a house in Bexley, a life with no obvious holes in it. The kind of couple that other couples describe as having it together. That description always felt slightly off to me, but I didn't have better words for what it actually was. The cracks started showing about 3 years ago. Small things at first. Camille began spending more weekends in Cincinnati with her friend group from college, a cluster of women who'd all married well and seemed to be in a quiet competition about who'd married best. She started talking about the house differently, about my job differently, like both things were inconveniences rather than foundations, like my insistence on doing things the right way, building, saving, being careful, was actually a failure of imagination rather than a form of integrity. I noticed the distance. I tried to address it twice, both times in what I thought were good faith conversations. The first time, Camille said I was overanalyzing. The second time, she said I was being controlling. I dropped the subject both times. Maybe I shouldn't have. But I am a litigation attorney, and I understand the difference between a conversation worth having and a battle worth choosing. And I told myself this was the former. I was wrong. It was neither. It was preparation. The drive home from downtown Columbus to Bexley takes about 15 minutes when the traffic cooperates. That afternoon it took 30 because I sat in the parking garage at the office for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself start the car. I sat there running through the phone call, parsing each word the way I parse testimony, looking for the thing underneath the thing. What I kept returning to was the timing. She'd called me at 11:47. Gerald Fowler had died, she said, the previous night. His estate attorney had called her that morning, and Camille had spoken to her own attorney before she called me. That was the sequence. Estate lawyer first, divorce lawyer second, husband third. I need you to understand something about that sequence. It means the decision to end the marriage wasn't made that morning. It means the only variable that changed that morning was that Camille now had financial independence. The divorce lawyer was ready. She'd already had a consultation, maybe more than one. She'd been planning this. The inheritance just gave her the moment she'd been waiting for. I started the car and drove home. The house on Drexel Avenue looked exactly the same as it always did. White colonial, shutters I'd painted myself 2 summers ago, the Japanese maple in the front yard that we'd planted the year we bought the place. I sat in the driveway for a moment, looking at it. I'd put my hands on every inch of that house. I'd fixed the furnace twice. I'd redone the tile in the upstairs bathroom myself over a long weekend when the contractor's quote came in twice what we'd budgeted. I'd planted that maple. I'd painted those shutters. I went inside. Camille was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of white wine and her laptop open. She looked up when I came in, but didn't stand, didn't move toward me. There was a folder on the table. I recognized the kind. Legal weight paper, a firm's letterhead on the tab. Not mine. "I'm glad you came straight home," she said, like I'd done her a favor. "Where else would I go?" I said. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I didn't look at the folder. I looked at her. I've spent 20 years learning how to read rooms and people, and I spent those first 60 seconds just reading my wife. She was calm. That was the first thing. Not the calm of someone who's at peace with a painful decision. I've seen that, and it has its own particular sadness. This was the calm of someone who'd finished being afraid. She'd been afraid of something, and now she wasn't. And the thing that had relieved her fear was money. That told me more than anything she could have said. "Camille," I said, "help me understand what happened here. Gerald died last night. Today you've retained a divorce attorney. Walk me through that." "I told you. I've been thinking about this for a long time." "How long?" She looked at her wine. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." She set the glass down. 2 years, Whitfield. Maybe longer. I've been unhappy for a long time. I just didn't see a clear path forward. Now I do. And the path forward doesn't include me. No, it doesn't. I sat with that for a moment. 14 years. A house we built together. 3 years of grief that reshaped us both. And the thing that finally freed her to say it out loud wasn't counseling, or courage, or even a specific breaking point. It was $6 million from an uncle she'd seen 4 times in my presence. "All right," I said. "I'm not going to beg you. You know me well enough to know I won't do that." Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief that I wasn't going to make a scene. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "But I want you to know something." I stood up. "Before you start calculating what this looks like, you should make sure your attorney has done a thorough review of Ohio marital property law. And you should make sure she's thought carefully about the last 14 years of financial documentation. Every contribution, every asset, every account." Camille frowned. "Gerald's inheritance is mine. It has nothing to do with marital assets." "You're right," I said. "The inheritance is yours, but everything else is a conversation." I went upstairs. I did not pack my things. I went to my home office, closed the door, and called my attorney. Not my colleague, not my firm, but the family law specialist I'd referred clients to for 11 years and had never personally needed until that moment. Her name was Sandra Cole. She practiced out of an office on East Broad Street in Columbus, and she was the best divorce attorney in Franklin County. I knew this because I'd sent her enough clients to know exactly how she worked. She answered on the second ring. "Sandra," I said, "it's Whitfield Mercer. I need to talk to you about my own situation this time." There was a brief pause. "I'll clear my afternoon," she said. Here is what Camille's attorney had apparently not told her, or what Camille had heard and dismissed, or what she simply hadn't thought through in the excitement of $6 million arriving on the same morning she'd decided to end her marriage. Ohio is an equitable distribution state. The inheritance from Gerald Fowler was, as she correctly understood, her separate property. That money was hers. But the house on Drexel Avenue, the investment accounts we'd built together over 14 years, the equity in the retirement funds, all of that was marital property, subject to equitable distribution. And equitable doesn't mean equal. It means fair. And fair means a lot of things when you have a thorough paper trail and a good attorney. Sandra walked me through it in her office the following morning. I'd taken the day off, first personal day I'd taken in 3 years. "The house is going to be the central issue," Sandra said. She was in her early 50s, with reading glasses she pushed up on her head when she was thinking. "How much equity?" "About $380,000, I said. "We bought at $460. It appraised at $810 last fall." "Mortgage balance?" $143,000. I've been making additional principal payments." Sandra made a note. "And the investment accounts?" "Joint brokerage account with about $210,000. My 401k is around $340. Her 403b from Ohio Health. I don't know the exact figure, but it's been growing for 12 years. "Did you make contributions to household expenses that allowed her to contribute more heavily to her retirement?" "I paid the mortgage for the last 4 years," I said. "We renegotiated our financial arrangement when she took a pay cut to move into a director role. I covered the house. She covered her own accounts. Sandra took off her glasses and set them on the desk. Whitfield. She thinks the inheritance gives her a clean exit. What she hasn't accounted for is that the exit was going to cost her something anyway, and now she has the resources to pay it, which actually makes this simpler for you, not harder. I hadn't thought about it that way, but Sandra was right. If Camille had tried to leave without the inheritance, the house would have been the central battlefield. She'd have needed to fight over every dollar. With $6 million in her column, the calculus changed. She could afford a clean settlement, and clean, in this context, meant one that reflected 14 years of actual contribution. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "Stay in the house," Sandra said. "Don't go anywhere. Don't pack a single bag. Let her attorney make the first move, and then we respond comprehensively." I went home that evening and made dinner. I made the chicken and roasted vegetables I'd been making on Tuesday nights for going on 9 years. Camille came downstairs to the smell of it, and for a moment, standing in the kitchen doorway, she looked confused, like she'd expected to come home to an empty house and found the wrong scene playing instead. "I thought you were going to pack," she said. "I didn't agree to that," I said. "Dinner's at 7. She stood there for another moment, then went back upstairs. She ate alone in her room. I ate at the kitchen table, reading case notes, and tried not to think about how many thousands of meals we'd eaten at that same table, and what it meant that I was now counting down the ones remaining. The next few weeks moved in the strange double time that crisis creates, where days feel endless, but weeks disappear. Camille and I occupied the house like two tenants who'd accidentally leased the same apartment. Careful, deliberate, avoiding the shared spaces without discussing it. She used the upstairs bathroom. I used the one off the mudroom. She cooked on the nights I worked late. I cooked when I was home. We were extraordinarily, exhaustingly polite to each other. Her attorney sent the first proposal 3 weeks after the phone call. I read it at my desk at the firm, door closed, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not for myself. For whoever had drafted this document, because it reflected a profound misunderstanding of our situation. The proposal offered me a buyout of my interest in the house. The equity divided 50-50, which came to roughly $190,000. It proposed that I keep my 401k, and she keep her 403b. It made no mention of the 11 years of financial records Sandra had already requested. It made no mention of the 4 years I'd single-handedly covered the mortgage. It was a document drafted by someone who assumed I was going to be grateful for any exit, humbled by the fact that my wife now had more money than I'd ever earn, and willing to take what I was given and disappear. I sent it to Sandra and told her to respond comprehensively. Sandra's counteroffer took 5 days to prepare and 12 pages to articulate. It documented, with supporting financial records, every mortgage payment I'd made independently over the 4 years of our renegotiated arrangement. It proposed a distribution of marital assets that reflected not just the mathematical split, but the actual history of who built what. It requested a formal appraisal of the house. It requested full disclosure of Camille's 403b balance. It was, by any objective measure, fair. It was also, I suspect, a significant shock to Camille and her attorney. The response came from Camille herself, not her attorney. She knocked on my home office door on a Sunday evening, came inside, and sat down across from my desk for the first time since this had started. "I didn't think you'd fight," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was something closer to genuine surprise. "I'm not fighting," I said. "I'm accounting for 14 years accurately. You're going to make this difficult." "No," I said. "I'm going to make it honest. Those aren't the same thing." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the framed photo on my desk, the two of us at Yosemite, 5 years into our marriage, before everything got complicated. We both looked young in that photo, younger than I remembered feeling at the time. "What do you actually want, Whitfield?" she asked. "I want what's fair," I said. "I want an accounting that reflects what I actually contributed to this marriage, financially and otherwise. I want to be able to look at a settlement document and feel like the 14 years I gave this marriage are treated like they counted. She looked at the photo again. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. The phone call or the marriage? She didn't answer that. She stood up, looked around the office, the bookshelves, the framed law school diploma, the toolbox I'd left in the corner after fixing the window latch last week, and left without saying anything else. 2 weeks later, her attorney called Sandra to schedule a mediation session. I want to tell you about my brother Nate, because he's the person who kept me steady through the part of this story that isn't about attorneys and settlement documents. Nate is 4 years younger than me, runs an electrical contracting business out of Lancaster, Ohio, and has been married to the same woman for 19 years, with what looks from the outside like complete contentment. He drove up to Columbus on a Saturday 3 weeks into all of this, and showed up at my door with a 12-pack and an agenda that consisted entirely of sitting on my porch and listening. She called you at work, Nate said, when I finished telling him the whole sequence. He said it slowly, like he was tasting each word. She called you at work and told you to pack your things. That's right. And you didn't. I did not. Nate cracked open a second beer and stared at the Japanese maple in the front yard. It was mid-October, and the leaves were turning, that particular shade of red-orange that only maples hit right at peak, when they look like they're lit from inside. You know what gets me? Nate said. She called you at work, not at home, where you could see her face, not after dinner, where you might have had the chance to actually talk. She called you at work so you'd be off balance, so you'd be in your professional environment, so maybe some part of your brain would process it like a business transaction and just comply. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but the more I sat with it, the more I thought Nate was right. Camille had always been strategic. It was one of the things I'd admired about her in professional contexts. In personal ones, apparently, that same quality could cut the other direction. So what do you do now? Nate asked. I stay, I said. I hold my ground. I make sure that when this is over, I can look at the outcome and know it reflects what's actually true. Nate nodded. And after? I looked at the maple. I'll figure that out when I get there. Nate stayed through Sunday evening. We fixed the gate latch that had been loose since summer. We watched the Browns lose in a manner so characteristic it had become almost comforting. We ate bad pizza and talked about our father, who'd been gone for 6 years, and what he would have made of all this. Our father was a tool and die machinist in Zanesville who'd worked the same job for 31 years and came home every night. No exceptions, until cancer made it physically impossible. He wouldn't have had much patience for someone calling his son at work to hand him an exit. Before Nate left, he pulled me into one of those one-armed hugs we do in my family, the kind that communicates more than any speech could. You're going to be fine, he said. I know, I said. And I did know. That's the strange thing about a crisis that arrives so suddenly and completely. It strips away all the noise of ordinary life, all the low-grade anxiety and accumulated uncertainty, and leaves you with just the clean, hard fact of what you're actually made of. I didn't like what Camille had done. I didn't like that 14 years had come to a phone call. But I knew, standing on that porch watching my brother drive away, that I was not someone who could be dismissed. Not by a phone call. Not by a check. The mediation session was held in a conference room at a neutral location, a firm on North High Street in Columbus, equidistant from both attorneys' offices. The room was exactly what mediation rooms always are: a long table, neutral art on the walls, a credenza with coffee that nobody touched, and the particular silence of people about to have an expensive conversation. Camille came in with her attorney, a woman named Priscilla Gates, who I'd seen in the courthouse a few times. Sandra and I were already seated when they arrived. Camille sat across from me, and this was the first time since the beginning of all this that I'd looked at her full on, in a lit room, in a formal context. She looked tired. I noticed that first. The assurance of that phone call, the cool, resolved voice, the clean break she'd imagined, had been replaced by something more complicated. The mediator, a man named Frank Delaney, who'd been doing this for 25 years, opened by explaining the process. Both sides had agreed to try mediation before litigation. The goal was a settlement both parties could accept. Standard framing. We both nodded. What followed was 3.5 hours that I'm going to compress for you, not because it lacks detail, but because the details are largely technical, and the emotional truth of it can be said more simply. Camille had come into this process believing that $6 million made her position unassailable. What she discovered over the course of that afternoon was that money doesn't erase history. It doesn't retroactively change who paid the mortgage for 4 years. It doesn't undo 14 years of documentation. Sandra presented our position methodically. The financial records, the property history, the contribution analysis. Frank Delaney asked questions. Priscilla Gates pushed back on some points, conceded others. Camille sat very still through most of it, watching Sandra work through the documentation, and I could see, I am a litigation attorney. I watch people for a living. I could see the moment she understood that this was not going to resolve the way she'd imagined on the morning she called me at work. Around hour 3, there was a break. I stepped into the hallway to get some air. Camille came out a few minutes later. We stood near the window at the end of the hall, looking out at North High Street, both of us holding paper cups of bad coffee. "You were always going to do this, weren't you?" she said. Not a question. "I was always going to make sure the outcome was accurate," I said. "I thought the money would make it simple." "Money doesn't make things simple," I said. "It just makes them faster. And in this case, it makes it possible for you to settle fairly without it being a hardship. Which means this ends cleanly for both of us." She looked at her coffee. "Do you hate me?" I thought about that carefully. "No," I said. "I'm angry. I think you handled this in a way that was designed to put me at a disadvantage, and I don't have a lot of respect for that. But I don't hate you. 14 years is 14 years. She nodded slowly. "I should have said something sooner. A long time ago." "Yeah," I said. "You should have." We went back into the room. By the end of the session, the framework of a settlement was on the table. The house would be sold and proceeds divided, accounting for my disproportionate mortgage contributions, which brought my share meaningfully above the 50-50 split that her initial proposal had offered. The retirement accounts would be handled according to their actual growth during the marital period, properly calculated. The joint brokerage account split reflected the documented history of contributions. The final numbers were significantly different from what Camille had proposed in that first letter. Sandra reviewed them with me afterward in the parking lot, the two of us standing in the November cold while she walked through the final figures. "Are you satisfied with this?" Sandra asked. "It's accurate," I said, which means yes. Sandra put her folder under her arm and looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "You know, in 22 years of family law, I've had very few clients who came in this clear-headed. Most people come in either devastated or enraged. You came in organized." "I had a few days to process before I called you," I said. "Most people don't use those days well," she said. "You did." She shook my hand in the parking lot and went back to her car, and I stood there for a moment in the cold air, looking up at the gray November sky over North High Street, and thought about all the different ways this could have gone. If I'd followed the script Camille had written, packed my bags, vacated the house, accepted the first offer out of shock or pride, or the desire to not be seen fighting over money, it would have been over faster, and it would have been wrong. Not wrong in an unfair way exactly, wrong in a factual way. The story of our marriage would have been recorded incorrectly, and I would have had to live with that inaccuracy for the rest of my life. I didn't want to live with an inaccurate story. That's the thing that kept me steady through all of it. Not anger, not the desire to punish Camille, just the refusal to let the record stand corrected. The house sold in February. The market in Bexley had stayed strong, and we got close to the fall appraisal price. I watched the movers carry out the furniture. The couch, the dining room table, the bed frame we'd bought at a shop in the short north years ago on a Saturday when we were still the kind of people who browsed furniture stores together on Saturdays. I watched it all go and felt something complicated that I'm still not entirely sure how to name. Grief, partly. Not for the marriage exactly, or not only for that. For the version of the future I'd expected to be living by now. You spend 14 years building something, and it calculates into your idea of the years ahead. And when it dissolves, you have to do the work of recalculating. That's not dramatic or violent. It's just slow and quiet and takes longer than you expect. But underneath the grief was something else. Something cleaner. Relief, maybe. The same relief I'd felt that morning in the parking garage, sitting with my cold coffee. The pretending was over. I didn't have to wonder anymore. I didn't have to read the room every night when I came home, trying to calculate whether we were in a good week or a hard week. I didn't have to carry the weight of a distance I couldn't close. I moved into an apartment in Italian Village, a neighborhood just north of downtown Columbus that I'd always liked. Good restaurants, older buildings with real character, close enough to the office that I could walk in good weather. The apartment was on the second floor of a converted Victorian on East Russell Street, with high ceilings and windows that let in real light. I furnished it slowly and deliberately, buying only what I actually wanted rather than filling space. It was the quietest place I'd lived since law school. Nate came up the first weekend I was in and helped me put together the bookcase I'd ordered. We stood back and looked at it when we were done. "It's a good place," he said. "It is," I agreed. "I want to tell you what happened 6 months later, because this is the part of the story I didn't see coming, and I suspect it's the part you haven't predicted either." I was at a continuing legal education seminar at the Columbus Convention Center in April. One of those full-day professional obligation events where you go because you have to and spend the morning hoping the afternoon moves faster. During the lunch break, I ended up at a table with a woman named Adrienne Cole, who was an estate planning attorney from a firm in Dublin, Ohio. She had a practical, direct way of talking that reminded me of Sandra Cole, which I took as a good sign. We talked about the morning sessions, which had been competent, but unremarkable. We talked about a case she was working on involving a contested inheritance, which led, naturally, to the fact that I'd recently been on the receiving end of an inheritance situation, in a manner of speaking. I gave her the short version. She listened without interruption, which is rarer than it should be. "How did you keep your head?" she asked when I'd finished. "During all of it." "I focused on what was accurate," I said. "Not what was flattering to me or what would feel good in the moment. Just what was actually true." She considered that. "That's a good way to practice law." "It's also a decent way to get through a divorce," I said. She smiled at that. A real smile, not a polished professional one. We exchanged cards before the afternoon session started. I'm not going to rush to a conclusion about Adrienne, because I'm a careful person and this is still early. But I'll say this. She called about a professional referral 2 weeks after the seminar, and we ended up talking for an hour about things that had nothing to do with professional referrals. And I find myself looking forward to conversations in a way I hadn't, in longer than I want to admit. There's a particular kind of lightness that comes from starting over when you know exactly who you are. Not the lightness of someone who's escaped something. I don't feel like I escaped anything. I feel like I accounted for something, like the ledger is correct now, and I can move forward from an accurate starting position. I've thought a lot about what I want people to take from this, not just the practical reality of knowing your rights when a marriage ends, though that matters, and if you're in that situation, please get a good attorney and get them early. But the larger thing. When Camille called me at work that morning, she made a calculation. She decided that $6 million was enough to buy her way past 14 years without a real reckoning. She decided that the money would make me fold. She decided that because she now had financial independence, she also had the power to write whatever ending she wanted. What she miscalculated was not my knowledge of the law, though that mattered. What she miscalculated was something simpler. She miscalculated that I might have some version of myself that didn't depend on her approval to exist. She'd watched me be a careful husband and a building partner for 14 years, and somewhere in there she'd confused steadiness with passivity. She'd confused someone who doesn't make scenes with someone who can be dismissed. I understand why she made that mistake. I'm not sure I showed her enough of what was underneath. That's a thing I'll sit with for a while, not as self-blame but as information. Marriage requires both people to show up as full versions of themselves, not just the agreeable surface. I'd kept a lot internal in the years when she was pulling away. I thought I was being stable. Maybe what I was actually doing was making myself invisible. That's a mistake I won't repeat. The house on Drexel Avenue sold to a young couple from Westerville who have a 2-year-old and are expecting their second. I drove by it in March, a few weeks after closing, and saw the lights on inside. New family. Fresh start. The Japanese maple was budding, the first signs of green at the tips of the branches after a long Ohio winter. I thought about the afternoon I'd planted that tree, 11 years ago. Camille inside making dinner, the smell of garlic coming through the screen door, the particular satisfaction of pushing a root ball into prepared soil and knowing it would grow. I'd planted it because I wanted something that would last, something that would be there in 20 years. The tree is still there, just the people around it changed. Some things take longer to grow than you expect. Some things survive winters you didn't think you'd make it through. And some mornings you wake up in a new apartment with light coming through old windows, and you realize that starting over from an accurate position is not a defeat. It's the only honest way forward. My name is Whitfield Mercer. I'm 43 years old. I live on East Russell Street in Italian Village in Columbus, Ohio. And for the first time in a long time, my life is exactly the size and shape it should be. I signed those divorce papers, gladly, but I signed the right ones, the ones that told the truth. You know what stayed with me about Whitfield's story? She called him at work because she thought being off balance would make him fold. And he just didn't. That's the thing about a man who knows exactly who he is. You can surprise him, but you can't shake him loose from himself. I think we've all had a moment where someone counted on us being too hurt or too tired to stand our ground. The ones who come out right aren't the loudest. They're the most accurate. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I rate everyone. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for?